As a reminder, this webinar series is free and open to all. It is held the first Thursday of every month at 2 p.m. Pacific time through December 2025. Our scope is national, but please note that we will focus quite a few of our resources are going to be on California specific items since that really is our area of expertise. Now, last month, we chatted about back to school tasks, policies, and procedures. That webinar is up on YouTube and within LunchAssist Pro. For our lunch break webinar today, Jen and I are diving deep into audits. We'll discuss the major reviews that child nutrition programs must undergo, including the NSLP Administrative Review, Procurement Review, and CACFP Administrative Review. First things first, Jen, why do we have these audits? What's the point?
That's a great first question, Emma. And welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. It's lovely to be here with you all. So yeah, this is a really good question, and I do get asked this a lot, actually, even just from like random people that don't know anything about school lunch and ask me, what do you do? And part of the reason I explain this is, essentially the federal government gives school lunch programs and school nutrition, child nutrition programs a lot of money. So we get about $20 billion or more from the federal government, and then billions more from states who pitch in, especially the state of California, who pitches into our programs here in California. So um, it's really a way, anytime there's a lot of money coming out of the federal government and into the hands of external organizations, even government organizations, there needs to be some sort of oversight. So it's kind of about that. The heart of it is spending taxpayer dollars wisely and helping ensure program integrity. So program integrity is really just that concept of making sure that we're following the rules. So when the dietary guidelines say to serve a variety of colorful vegetables, and then our rules and regulations say we need to serve this amount of dark green, then there's someone coming out from the state to say, okay, do you have that on your menu? And if not, then maybe there'll be a repercussion, whether it's a fining or a fiscal action, to make sure that we do follow those rules and regulations. So that's kind of the heart of it, as to why we have these audits. I also want to make sure that upfront we sort of address this whole like audit, like nomenclature, if you will. And I know there's some people here from the state. Welcome. And there's probably other people who have been auditors or work for other states. So, or USDA potentially. So audits versus reviews. So as a former director, and those of you who are directors and menu planners on the call, and school nutrition professionals, all of us lunch ladies, we just call them audits, right? We're like, oh man, the auditors come into my school. So that's what we all say, and so that's kind of how we speak at LunchAssist. But the technical term, if you look in federal regulations, is a review. Audits True audits tend to be like more serious than these administrative reviews that we go under. So there's other types of audits that folks have, but we'll just use these terms interchangeably if everyone's okay with that, just because that's kind of how we all speak in lunch lady land anyway. So yeah, so we're gonna use the term audit and review interchangeably.
All right. Well, what are the three different audits that we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the S&P AR, so the School Nutrition Program AR, which is under, that's like our NSLP audit for the school lunch program, breakfast, and a few other adjacent programs. We've got the Procurement Review, which looks at things within the school nutrition program, but is specific to procurement. And then we've got the CACFP Administrative Review that is a common thing that we interact with if our schools run supper, snack, or potentially childcare programs.
Okay, now I know there's a few different departments in each state that administer these audits, but who exactly is coming around to check up on us? Who are the auditors?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it really, the alphabet soup. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. Okay, focus. The USDA really delegates these audits from the federal government to the states, right? So that's important to know. So your auditors are typically coming from your state agency, even though they're here to kind of enforce USDA regulations. Sometimes they're enforcing some state regulations too, but typically these ARs are pretty much federal, but then they're administered by the state. And across the country, states have different states are set up differently. So even just the way they're named. So in Montana, which is where a lot of our staff comes from, they used to work for the Office of Public Instruction, which is like in charge of all the education at the state agency level. And in California, that basically same agency for the state of California is called the California Department of Education. And that's the state agency that conducts administrative reviews, procurement reviews. In Texas, it's Texas Department of Agriculture. So it's not under education in Texas, it's under agriculture, similar to the feds. And then within states, it can also be structured differently because we've got the umbrella of child nutrition programs. And under that umbrella, we've got school nutrition programs, so like our NSLP audits, and then we've got CACFP, and those can be structured differently at the state level. So even though they're under the same umbrella at USDA, within the states, they get split apart differently. So as many of us are very well aware of in California, there's two different state agencies that we have to interact with in order to have that administrative oversight. For NSLP, we go through CDE, like we just mentioned, and then for CACFP, there's another state agency called the California Department of Social Services, and they don't really talk to one another or streamline anything on the review. So it's like completely separate state agencies. Similar in Colorado, for example. So Colorado, you've got Colorado Department of Ed. Also, their acronym is also CDE, which is funny. And then you've got the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment that does the CACFP in Colorado. So it's kind of similar, and different states are differently working differently like that. And then the actual auditors. So again, this works differently in different states. If you're in a smaller state, you might just have one person that you're interacting with on all these audits. But in California, there's a lot of different people to talk to. So we've got, for our school lunch administrative review, we've got at least 3 reviewers to interact with. You've got your lead reviewer, who's the one who's typically going to come out to your school sites. And then we've got another person in Sacramento that just does the offsite assessment. That's their job. And then you've got another person that just does the Section 700 resource management review. So that's at least 3 people. So even if you're in a very small single school district, you're going to have at least 3 auditors.
Wow.
And then if you're in a bigger district, like I see Colleen from San Diego, hi Colleen, they have a lot more because they have so many sites. And so then they'll have like all these other people coming in person to do site visits. So they might have 5 or 6. I don't know how many you guys had last time, Colleen. And then procurement review, also someone at the state agency that administers NSLP, so CDE in California, but another different auditor that's only specialized in procurement. So that's another person to manage. And then CACFP is typically in California, it's usually just one person, but it depends on the size of your district. You might have multiple people. If you're, in San Francisco, you have like a few more people because they have so many sites as well. So yeah, you can kind of just get a picture of like all the different folks to connect with at the state level when you are going through these audits. And again, in a big state like California, you have a lot of different people because everyone's so specialized at the state level.
Right. And so we have a few different agencies and different audits to keep track of, which makes me wonder, how often do these auditors come around? How often are we reviewed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, like everything else, this varies by state. So from the USDA standpoint, you can see here, you've got the different years. Like it's usually 3 to 5 years for the administrative review and the procurement review. And then for CACFP, it's typically every 2 to 3 years, depending on how many sites you have. But then in California, the review cycles tend to be a little bit longer. So the school nutrition program administrative review is 5 years at the moment. In the past, it had been 6. And it also works a little differently in California where they do it on a cycle. I don't think that's true in every state, but you could fall anywhere in the cycle. So just because it says once in a 5-year cycle, it doesn't mean you're going to have 5 years between, like it's not like once every 5 years. It's a once in the 5-year cycle. So we've had clients who had
Hmm.
2 administrative reviews in like 18 months because they were at the end of one cycle and at the start of the next cycle. So they really only had 1 school year in between. And then we've had clients like we have a new client right now who hasn't had an AR since 2018 because I don't know why. We're like, "Wait, what?" So, yeah, it's just like,
Wow.
yeah, it's wild. So and then the procurement review in California, the state must have some sort of waiver or something because 'cause they're on an 8-year cycle, but we haven't seen that in any other states. So yeah, you can just see how, like, those cycles, and again, it's the same thing with procurement review where it's on this cycle. So it's not once every 8 years, it's like in that cycle, you could fall anywhere and you really don't know where until the list comes
Mhm.
out.
Mhm.
Oh, and so yeah, I was gonna say essentially the other thing you can kind of probably starting to think about, and many of you know all too well, is that sometimes you deal with multiple audits, right? So it's very common for us to see folks having 2 audits in the same year. Some states do this intentionally, like they just combine the AR and the procurement review or the school nutrition program and CACFP. Um, but it's a little bit random in California as to like what list you're on and if it's overlapping or not. It is very stressful if you have more than 2. Like if you have all 3, we highly recommend that you try to reschedule one of them, which you can do. Like you can plead your sob story with the state and try to get it rescheduled. We've had lots of luck with that over the years. So, because like as you can imagine, if you have all 3 audits in the same year, that's again not 5 different auditors to deal with from 2 different state agencies. If you're in California, it might be a little bit more manageable in a smaller state where you only have like one person coordinating all of this at the state level. You might be like, just get it done, like. But if you're in a state like California, then I would say try not to have ideally just one at a time, but if you can not have more than 2, that's ideal.
Yeah, that is ideal. And so we have, these 3 different audits for different child nutrition programs, but I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about the different programs that these audits apply to. What programs are audited?
Yeah, definitely. Let's kind of dig into it because we're talking about 3 audits, but like sort of what's inside of
Yeah.
each of these boxes. Door number 1, you have your school nutrition administrative review, you've got your school nutrition essentially procurement review, and then you've got CACFP. And today I just want to preface this as well by saying that we're really talking about the CACFP at risk administrative review. That's what we're going to focus on today. There are some additional aspects and layers to this for schools that might operate childcare, daycare programs, but most schools, like I think all but like maybe 4 of our clients only have at risk if they have CACFP. So that's what we'll focus on today, if that's all right.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, kind of peeling back the layers of the onion here. We've got the school nutrition program. So SMP Administrative Review, that's like the proper name of this audit. A lot of us just call it like our lunch audit or NSLP audit. So we're looking at NSLP, of course, school breakfast program, NSLP snacks if you have them, SSO if you operate that like in the summer, or sometimes people operate that over school breaks. Like if you have 3 or 4 weeks over Christmas, you might do SSO over the holidays. And then the fresh fruit and vegetable program. So essentially all areas of the school nutrition program, except for procurement, because that's of course covered by the procurement review. So the procurement review is a relatively newer review. Like I think it's only been around for maybe less than 10 years or so. So like way back when we never had that. Like I started in schools in 2010. There was definitely no procurement review and not a huge emphasis on procurement. But as we all know, that's been like a big sea change in the last many years. And that's why we have this procurement audit now. It's really just looking at purchases made out of the school nutrition program. So that nonprofit school food service account, we call it Fund 13 in California, and checking to make sure that our purchases were made in accordance with procurement rules and regs. And then, like I mentioned before, we have the CACFP at-risk administrative review. So that's all areas of your at-risk after-school snack and supper. Again, we're just focusing on that, but CACFP reviews can be a lot more in depth if you have childcare centers, like a daycare, or if you, some people run um, like CACFP kind of daycare centers over the summer or over school breaks, extended school breaks, where they do meal benefit forms. So it's like a kind of like an application, but different. So those get real complicated real fast if you have those, but the CACFP at-risk review is what most schools deal with. If you just have at-risk after-school snack and supper, that's all you have to do with your CACFP review, and it isn't as in-depth as the full-blown childcare audit if you have like a proper childcare center running.
Right. Okay. So now that we've talked a little bit more about the programs that these audits apply to, I'd love to understand more about the nuances within each audit. What is the scope of each review? What are they auditing here?
Yeah, this is like super high level. So and as you guys know, we have more resources on all this. So we'll talk about those a little bit later, but we go into much more depth like in our AR boot camp on all of this. But just like for purposes of this webinar, I kind of wanted to just break down the main overarching things of each AR so we could see them at a glance. So the School Nutrition Program Administrative Review, USDA actually has really amazing resources. Like there's a whole manual, all that if you want to see what the reviewer is going to actually ask you, it's all on the USDA website. Like that's all transparent. And they even break down, the review into these categories. So performance standard 1 is like our applications and meal counting stuff. And then performance standard 2, we've got our meal pattern menus, offer versus serve, that kind of stuff. These top 2 areas, this is the kind of stuff that you'll see, like immediate fiscal action, if you will, if you're really out of compliance. So if they see that your meal counts are just like not added up correctly and you claimed, they'll disallow that claim and make you revise it. Or if a kid goes through and doesn't have their fruit or vegetable, and then that meal got counted, that meal will get disallowed. So that's where you see that like immediate fiscal action. If you have an application that's been calculated wrong and it says they're free, but they're not, they're reduced or paid, then that gets disallowed. The general areas is kind of everything else. USDA says, these typically do not result in fiscal findings unless they're a repeat. But I will say that the more we do this, the more we do see that resource management does tend to have, I guess it's technically not, I don't know if like the technical way to say it is fiscal action or not. But we do see a lot of folks having to transfer money from their general fund into the school lunch program, which to me as a former director, that's fiscal action. Like I do not want to have to tell my boss that they need to give me 20 grand because I did something wrong. I'd actually prefer my claims to be adjusted than have to get money from the general fund. But yeah, so if you have some stuff out of certain things on resource management, can result in the general fund having to repay food services, even for the first offense. So I just kind of highlight that one here because that's what we see in practice of like, yeah, having the general fund have to repay things. So that's kind of the scope of your S&P AR. Your procurement review is really, like we said, it's kind of under that school nutrition program umbrella, but then it's only looking at procurement. So it's like a very narrow area of the school lunch program, if you will. So everything from your procurement procedures to your code of conduct to Buy American. Buy American is also looked at in the NSLP audit and in the procurement audit. So there's some overlap, but not a ton. Most of it, that's one of the main things that overlaps, but pretty much everything else is kind of like segmented into this audit. And they're just looking at the way we're purchasing things with our school nutrition program funds. And then if we have findings here, often it's technical assistance, but especially now in California, we had like our first 8-year cycle was only technical assistance. Now we've moved on to kind of like real reviews for procurement. Other states have already been doing real reviews for like many years. But yeah, this is the first year that there'll be proper corrective action on the procurement review in California. So some of these corrective actions can be, simple stuff like having to update procedures or do staff training, amend contracts, resolicit, which is kind of a pain. You might have to resolicit a contract, submit your bid to the state for pre-approval. But then there can be some more serious stuff. And again, like we don't know exactly how this is going to play out because we haven't seen it in action in California yet, but it has been happening already in other states and is sort of outlined by USDA as something that states have the authority to do, which is to disallow contract costs. So if we procured something completely wrong, they could say, again, like that's like you shouldn't have spent Fund 13 or nonprofit school food service account funds on that. So the general fund has to repay that. Again, we haven't seen that in action, but that is potentially what we're expecting for this year, unfortunately for some folks, but we'll see what happens. There is authority to have fiscal action where reimbursement is withheld for repeat findings, but we'll see. I don't think that that will come into play in California this year because technically there's no repeat findings since the last reviews were all technical assistance reviews. But again, we'll see. We'll see how that all plays out. And then the CACFP review kind of mirrors the NSLP administrative review. I would say this audit can result in fiscal action for things like unallowable costs. So one that surprised me, and I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that CDSS gave fiscal action for was that the school had served a grain-based dessert. So they didn't even credit it. So as you guys probably know, CACFP, you can't serve grain-based desserts like cookies. That's against the meal pattern and you can't credit them. But this school wasn't crediting them. They just had them on their menu and they had used CACFP dollars to buy cookies as a treat. But they also had, like a burger that was a whole grain bun. So they had all their food and they just had a cookie as an extra. And they actually got their reimbursement taken back, like $800 of reimbursement taken back for the amount of money they had spent on the cookie because it was like an unallowable cost because grain-based desserts are unallowable costs in CACFP. So there's definitely potential for fiscal action in this one. Unallowable costs, meal counts, meal pattern, and then they have something called like serious deficiencies that they look at, or of course like repeat findings.
Got it. So, it does sound like there is some overlap, but generally a lot to keep track of. And one of the most common questions we get from folks is what's the difference between how the SNP administrative review and the procurement review look at our financial transactions? So what's the difference here? Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, so this is one that our consultants on the team wanted us to sort of dissect. And I think you'll see why, because it feels a little bit like same, but different when you're looking at the school nutrition program administrative review, the resource management financials, and then the procurement review, because like you just mentioned, it's both looking at transactions, right? So kind of to differentiate these in our minds, when we're looking at the AR and the resource management financial piece, we're looking at how funds are spent and whether the expenses are allocable is the word they use, properly approved under federal regulations, right? So was it necessary? Was it reasonable? Kind of looking at your general ledger and like, what did you spend was an allowable cost. Procurement, there is a layer of allowability, but it's not in practice. I feel like it's not really looked at as often. It's more about the process, the procurement process. How did you procure? Did you get quotes? Did you have the proper procedures in place? What method of procurement did you use? Was it an allowable method of procurement? Did you keep your documentation? So the resource management's kind of like, what did you purchase? Was it allowable? Was it pre-approved? That kind of thing. And then procurement's more like, how did you purchase it? Did you follow the right process? And then kind of just an example of this, because I'm like, even as I'm explaining it, I'm like, I feel like I need a real life example. And this one is, this is a real life example. So there's a purchase that can be, we have this example of a purchase that was allowed in one audit, but disallowed in another. And you're like, wait, what? How is that even possible? I know, crazy. So procurement review. All right, so think about this. You've got your procurement review, right? And you've got a copy machine that was audited as a small purchase. It was procured properly. You got 3 quotes, purchased from the lowest price vendor, saved all your paperwork, all good, right? And no findings, everything was good in the procurement review. Then this same purchase gets pulled during the administrative review, because one of the questions that everyone gets asked is, did you get prior approval on capital expenses? And the copy machine was like a really fancy one, over $10,000, over the capitalization threshold. And even though we all use copy machines, they're not on the CDE pre-approved list, which like blows my mind. So you have to literally send an email to get approval for capital expenses if they're not on this pre-approved. It's just paper pushing. Like, it's the most ridiculous thing, but that's the world we live in. So this capital expense, you just forgot. You're like focused on procurement. You forgot to ask for pre-approval. So yeah, the school forgot to request pre-approval. So then the general fund literally had to repay for the copy machine. And yeah, and the wildest thing, because this is a real life example, the wildest thing is that then the resource management unit was like, well, then since the school is paying for it, the school can take it, like the general fund can take possession of it. And then they just had this department email them for pre-approval, and then they bought a new one. And this is where, so now you have 2 copy machines. And when we're thinking about taxpayer dollars, it just feels so inefficient. But again, I'm not criticizing the state. Like, they're just following USDA guidelines, right? It's just like, this is bureaucracy at its finest. And this is also why we really love doing our job at LunchAssist, which is helping you guys navigate all of this, because we're all super passionate about scratch cooking and farm to school and like feeding kids. But this is the kind of stuff that really puts a barrier in front of all of that good, all those good things that we're all trying to do. And so we kind of take our job really seriously at LunchAssist to help you guys navigate this and help clients, like, just like reminders, like push this paper, send this email,
Right.
do these things so that you don't take away from all the good work that you're doing, or you don't, we don't want any of our directors to get in trouble with their boss because they just forgot to send an email because they were focused on way more important stuff like farm to school. So this is kind of our jam because of stuff like this, and we try to prevent things like this for our clients.
Right. And it is so much to keep track of. And, it also makes me wonder, though, how far back are the auditors looking?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because well, yeah, let's just break it down by audit as well. So most of the time, you can see like the big list here is the same year as your AR. And what we mean like that is like your current year. So let's say you're under AR this is for your school nutrition program administrative review. The big list on the far right, these are the things that they're going to look at this year. So if you've got a school year 25-26 AR, all the stuff you see here by American Civil Rights, meal counting, meal pattern, menus, that's all going to be for this year. Sometimes only for 1 week. Like, it's like just a tiny little snapshot in the current year. They're not really looking back into previous years. The previous year, though, is always looked at for resource management. So your financials, so those capital expenses that we were just talking about, that's always the previous year, at least in California. So you're looking at the previously closed fiscal year, and then some other things like record keeping and SFSP outreach. But the big one is the resource management. So If you've, like, for instance, if you're a new client to LunchAssist and you've just come in, your books are probably already closed for last school year. And if something was done wrong on your financials, there's not really any way we can help you fix that. We just are triaging it because it's like if your audits this year, we can fix all this stuff on the right-hand side the same year as your AR, but things in the past we can't really do anything about. It's just about reporting them and dealing with it and like mitigating risk as much as we can. The things in the middle, it can kind of go either way depending on what it is, depending on what time of year your AR is. So like health inspections, it's usually the two most recent health inspections. But if your AR is in November or December, you probably haven't had two inspections this year. So they might look at last year's.
Mm.
And then procurement. So procurement, we're always looking backwards to the previous school year. So if you're on procurement review for 25-26, you're going through it right now, then it's everything that was purchased out of the school nutrition budget for last school year. But then it can go back even further if you have bids or solicitations or contracts that have been extended for multiple years. And this is where we see probably even more issues with record keeping and especially if you've had like turnover, like you maybe you started in the district last year. You don't really know how things were procured 3 years ago. And so just an example of that. So let's say you're on an AR right now. So they're looking at all the school year 24-25 purchases. You had a formal bid with Gold Star that was done in 21-22, and that contract was renewed 3 years. Totally normal situation. The audit will actually pull, like, so if the state picks the Gold Star procurement to go into more depth on as your formal procurement, then they'll pull that base year contract from 21-22, and you'll have to provide the original bid and like even the notice that was posted in the newspaper and like responses from everyone else who said like all the other vendors that competed for that bid. And that's where sometimes it's like the files aren't super well organized unless you've been there for a long time and you've been on top of it. It's just, that can be hard to track down. And then with the CACFP review, it's kind of, again, it kind of mirrors NSLP where most of the stuff's for the current year, but there's financials for last year, the previous program year. So their program year is actually October to September. So sometimes you have to do financials for that October to September, even though your financials are July to June. That can be a little confusing. It depends on the auditor, what they're looking for. They usually look at your facility reviews for last year. And then what's interesting is they're looking at procurement. If you're procuring goods specifically for CACFP, even though you have a procurement audit for NSLP, remember CACFP is a separate fund. And so they may ask for procurement stuff. It depends on how you're set up. And I'm realizing I really want to preface the other thing is if you have systemic issues, like if they come in and nothing's prepared, or if it just feels like something is off here, they can look back as far as they want on anything, but it's very rare. Like we don't see that very often, if ever. It's just more like if you have allocations of or allegations of like fraud, or if someone comes in and it's like clear there's no oversight on the programs, the state has the authority to look back further on pretty much anything. And we know schools that have had like serious like audits and investigations, FBI investigations, stuff like that. So don't think that this is like the narrowest scope as like they're never going to look at menus from last year no matter what. Like if there's big systemic issues, then they might say, you know what, I need to look at previous stuff just to see if this has been, how long has this been going on for. But in general, what we just covered is like what we see in 99% of cases. Like most of you won't ever have to deal with that.
Yeah, well, it still sounds like the auditors are looking pretty far back in many circumstances. So what areas can we prepare in advance for these audits?
Yeah, so that's kind of like our jam is like getting things prepared in advance. So like I said, it we love like all the like good things that everyone's doing for farm to school and scratch cooking and like all the innovative nutrition education programs and things like that. And the way we like to support those things is actually by helping you kind of keep track of audit stuff, which is a little indirect, but hopefully removes a lot of administrative burden so that you can focus on the stuff that really matters. And over the years, we've learned that, I mean, when I first started doing this, like just by myself prepping a handful of clients for audits, I was really only working on things in the audit year. But over the years, we've developed a really good system to keep people on track, even during your non-audit years. And it's kind of, I think that audit prep really ideally does start well before the audit year, especially like for things that you know that they're going to be looking backwards on: procurement, financials, even things like wellness. Even just try, if you know you have an upcoming audit, even just getting a jump start of like at least 6 months before the audit year starts. So you can do a little bit of, damage control. Because if you have been focused on all like lots of innovation in your program, a lot of times that's at the cost of, having this compliance brain on. And we know that and we see that so often. So we never really want people to be in that situation where they're like, I can't do this innovative thing because it's my audit year. So doing a little bit of audit prep all the time allows you to continue to innovate and not be so bogged down by audit stuff. But I guess that's a really long-winded answer, so sorry. Hopefully you guys get a vibe there. And then one thing that we have recently created, so many of you who are clients will start to see this rolled out, is we're doing a little bit of a pre-audit checklist, like with about 4 months before you go into that audit year. So like the year before the audit, we're kind of doing this pre-audit checklist. So many of you who are clients, you will start to see this in the spring. We'll start to kind of do that. So yeah, I think that 6 months before your audit year is a critical period, but as much as possible, kind of staying audit ready all the time is great if you can, if you have the bandwidth for that.
Yeah, I love seeing this resource, and I know it'll be incredibly helpful. And it sounds like the biggest takeaway here is to really keep up with what we like to call preventative maintenance. So in terms of resources, what is out there for support and where can folks learn more?
Yeah, definitely. So, as many of you guys already know, we have our AR boot camp. So that's a really great resource. And again, we have clients who do that like a year or two before just to learn about what to expect. So, you just purchase access to the course once and you keep it forever. So, like, you don't have to worry about waiting for your audit year if you want to get ahead of the game and sort of like wrap your brain around all this stuff. Use the checklist, things like that. We also have lots of AR and procurement review webinars like this one, and they all kind of take a little bit of a different spin. We try not to be too repetitive, so you probably saw that today. It's like a little different way than we've seen content in the past. We have a procurement review support series. So this is, I think it's like a 6-part series that we're doing. Is it 6
I think we have
total?
5 total.
Five. Okay. So 5 calls. We just did our first one. This is really intended for clients and pro members who are on a procurement review this year. We're going to create a procurement review boot camp in the future. So we're just kind of like trialing out content with members and clients who are on procurement review this year. So really good and going in depth on all the stuff for the procurement review. So feel free to join that. And then consulting, of course. So we work one-on-one with over 100 school districts in California, really in depth. All of our consultants are former auditors, and we kind of help manage that, like preventative maintenance for you, whether it's your audit year or ideally coming in to work with us at least a year before you think you're going to get an audit is really great. Like we love when people do that because then we get so much done and we can be like, it's not so stressful. It's just like little chip away, chip away, chip away at little things. And then you feel really prepared and like ready to focus on the things that you actually want to do with your program. Because let's be honest, no one really wants to focus on audits. We just know we have to. So that's why we focus on it, because we kind of nerd out on it. So yeah. And then the other resources I would say, so one way I learned so much about audits, so because I mentioned most of our staff are former auditors, but I'm not. I'm just a lunch lady. Like I started in schools, I worked in a couple of districts. So one of the ways, of course, I've learned so much from the gals on my team who are former auditors, but I kind of taught myself to be a baby auditor by just reading all of the USDA manuals. And there's some, like I said, a lot of this stuff is transparent from USDA. So the administrative review manual, oh, great, we have so many resources here that someone just threw in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, so there's the procurement review tool is completely public from USDA. So if you want to go see exactly what the reviewer is going to be asking you, those are all transparent. And that's how we build a lot of our stuff at LunchAssist too, is by like looking at those and then putting them into, you know, pretty and like more easy to read versions of these really dense government resources. So don't feel like you have to go read that stuff. That's kind of like what we're doing as well. But it's nice if you want to go check the original sources and sort of upskill and learn for yourself from the USDA stuff. And then of course the states also have their own kind of manuals and whatnot.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of those resources. One other thing that helps everyone stay on track is our monthly checklist. So we have a September checklist that we just released. I'll put that in the chat box as well for folks to download. And within this September checklist, Jen, are there a few items that you specifically want to call out attention to this month? What do we need to know to stay on track?
Yeah, well, actually, the first thing I'll just mention is the checklist itself as a resource. So you guys know we put these out every month. This is that preventative maintenance in action. So that's why we create these checklists, is like to give you little reminders throughout the year. So it's just sort of like drip style content to help you check off the boxes of compliance stuff without the whole long list of everything that's going to be audited. So if you follow along each month with the checklist, you should have most of your boxes checked on audit prep, even in your non-audit years. This month, a couple of things that I'll just pluck out real quick here are your net cash resources, and if you need a budget agreement. So start working on this. We've got the link to the California version of the tool. There's a USDA version as well for folks from other states. If you have excess net cash resources, then you need to work with the state to make sure you either renew or start for the first time a budget agreement. In California, excess net cash resources is actually 6 months of operating costs, but in most other states, it's only 3 months. So just kind of seeing where you ended at the end of last year, once your unaudited actuals are ready, filling out this tool and then working with the state to make sure you have that budget agreement on file you just have to at least email the state by October 15th to start the process. You don't have to like send them a whole agreement. They'll work with you on that. And then September is Food Safety Month. And so for all those food safety nerds out there, if you want to do anything. And one thing that we like to check this time of year is just making sure that the director and at least one staff at each site has your food safety certification for like the manager or food safety protection manager. This is something that you will have to show during your AR. So we check on it every September. It's not necessarily due in September, but something to check on this year to make sure you have these certifications on file. And then, of course, the actual fun stuff. October is Farm to School Month, so there's some beautiful resources. I saw Jacqueline Day from California Department of Food and Ag. Hi, Jacqueline. If you want to throw anything in there that you guys at CDFA are doing, if there's anyone from National Farm to School Network on here, feel free to pop some stuff in the chat. But yeah, lots of fun stuff going on in Farm to School Month. There's the California Crunch Day, and yeah, would love to hear what you guys are doing. Again, with the actual fun stuff. So yeah, that's all I have. I'll pass it back to you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that as well, I have to say. And thanks, everyone. So before we open it up to Q&A, I just wanted to mention that the follow-up resources will be sent to all registrants shortly after this call. The slides, recordings, and every related material will be up within LunchAssist Pro. And then those on the call live today, we will be marking you as here and recording those training hours in LunchAssist Pro for you. Our next chat is October 2nd. And our deep dive topic will be financial management with a special guest from the Food Research and Action Center to give us some federal policy updates. I also want to remind everyone that membership with LunchAssist Pro and access to the training library, AR bootcamp, and consulting services, they're just a great use of your kit funds if you have any of those left. And then, of course, everything can be purchased with your cafeteria funds. Thanks again to all of our members and customers for making this happen. Please schedule a call with Mike to learn more. He'll walk you through it. I'll put his email in the chat. It's mike@lunchassist.org. Okay, so now let's open it up to some Q&A.